Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden. I'm surrounded by abundance in this polytunnel. It's amazing what a little bit of undercover growing space can do in terms of producing so much food. Got these Chinese cabbage flower shoots, absolutely delicious. Tons of coriander. We've got some chard coming through. The first borage of the season, which is amazing. It's nice to have all of this food. And in this polytunnel, I apply a lot of permaculture principles in terms of treating soil health, in terms of polyculture, in terms of attracting pollinators. And if you know permaculture, there's 12 principles. But I thought I'd do a video about 12 myths and misunderstandings that surround permaculture to try and just set the record straight. If you've never heard of permaculture before, I'll give you a super brief description, introduction, otherwise use this timestamp to skip ahead. Permaculture comes from the joining of two words, permanent agriculture. It was established around the 1970s in Australia by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, and they created 12 principles. So these 12 principles are seen as a design toolkit, and they're very much inspired by patterns in nature and how we can use those principles to make spaces, be it gardens or communities, that work in harmony with the land and with the seasons. And many of these ideas are rooted in indigenous culture. And I think my favourite thing about permaculture is its accessibility. No matter what the situation you're in, what climate you're in, these principles are universal. The first myth is that permaculture is only for rural properties, like where I'm based at the moment. This is all a field and we're turning it into, hopefully, a nice permaculture paradise. I totally understand where this myth comes from. Originally, the idea with permaculture is how you can transform whole landscapes into abundance. However, as I mentioned before, the thing about the permaculture principles is that they're universal and they can be applied to any setting. You can apply them if you just have a balcony, if you have a rooftop garden. You can apply it all the way to a community garden, all the way to a whole entire landscape. And I think the empowering thing about permaculture is that no matter the scale, you're going to have a positive impact on your local environment. The second myth is that permaculture is expensive. And it can be expensive, and I think a lot of the times it comes down to context, because there's loads of ways where permaculture can actually save you a huge amount of money, and I think it all comes down to scale and intent. If you have some capital and you're setting up a farm and you're trying to make a profit, you've got to do that outlay of getting the right plants, doing the landscaping, etc., just like you would for a business. However, if it's just your back garden that you're setting up, you don't need any of that expense. You can be really clever about it. All of these pallets we've got for free just by going around and asking a couple of different companies, and they're just like, yeah, just pick them up whenever you want. These, you can make raised beds out of it, you can build furniture out of these, you can make fire if you want. This is a waste resource, but it's a way that we can save a lot of money. I like to make borders out of pallets as well. You can make compost bins out of pallets. It's just a prime example, yet that's not going to cost any money. So when it comes down to permaculture is expensive, it's more so based on the situation, because I really think in its roots, permaculture is actually about understanding the most cost-effective, kind to environment way of developing a space. And if you look at permaculture over the long term, because it is a long-term strategy, that's where you really see massive savings on top of all of the other benefits. The third myth is that permaculture is a new and untested idea. So whilst the term was coined in the 1970s, much of it originates from the knowledge and the practice of indigenous cultures for centuries around the world. So it is rooted in truth and wisdom. And I think the nice thing about permaculture is that it's blending that with also scientific methods as well, a lot of experimentation. But again, permaculture, it's not a set of rules, it is a guide. It's a nice set of principles for us to use. The fourth myth is that permaculture is just for hippies. This isn't true. Permaculture, it's a very practical approach that can be used by anyone, anywhere. It's not a subculture. There are some examples that I know where perhaps, things are taken a bit extreme and perhaps a little bit too far-fetched or a little bit too off-putting for people who are just dipping their feet into permaculture, but I think you get that across the board no matter what. What permaculture is something that everyone can use. The fifth myth, that's hard to say. The fifth myth of permaculture is that it's a quick fix. So the strength in permaculture is having patience. When you have patience, that's when it just works so well. It's got that long-term view ingrained in its principles and in its approach. That's not to say that some of the principles will create instant solutions, instant change, but as a whole, when you look at permaculture, you never look at just one thing, you look at the whole system, for example, the whole garden. And over time, permaculture is going to heal that land, if that land needs healing, and then turn that land into abundance. And there's so many little things that we can enjoy along the way. Perhaps the best way of thinking about it is, say, planting an apple tree isn't a quick fix if you don't have access to, say, tree fruit. However, yes, you're going to wait 5, 6, 7 years, but in that process, there's going to be so many things along the journey that you enjoy. The sixth myth is that permaculture is just about growing food. So whilst that is a big part about it, it is not just rooted in food production. It's about creating a holistic design system. And so for that, you need to think about things like water management, waste management, creating habitats for wildlife. Food comes under that, but in order to grow food in a truly kind of regenerative way, you need to make sure that there's an ecosystem and the environment around it to support that. And so in order to grow food that is kind to nature, you've got to think a bit like looking at a flower. There are many different petals that make up a flower. And so things like I mentioned for water management, resource management, the creation of compost, all of these different things are the different petals that when you bring them together form a flower that forms a sustainable food system. The seventh myth is kind of the myth that put me off permaculture the most when I started this journey, is the whole idea that permaculture is complicated. In life, if you want to learn a skill, nothing really comes easy. You can't just jump straight into doing a grade 7, grade 8 on the piano if you've never played it before. Instead, you've got to learn a few of the basic keys and build up. It's a similar approach to permaculture. Pick 1, 2 or 3 of the principles that excite you the most, start learning about those, and gradually everything else is going to fall into place. I think out of all of the myths that I mentioned in this video, I wish that this one was the one that didn't exist, that everyone could understand that once you get the context of permaculture, it really is very simple and very easy. And the lovely thing about permaculture is that it is very solutions oriented. And so when you run into a problem, you turn to the permaculture principles and to other examples, to case studies, especially in your area, to find solutions. And so being able to problem solve in itself is such a lovely thing. And so yeah, we need to bust the myth that permaculture is too complicated. The eighth myth is that permaculture is only suitable for warm climates. So this might happen if someone has just stumbled upon permaculture, a bit interested, looked into it, saw that the idea originates from Australia and thought, oh no, I don't live in Australia, it's not going to work. As I mentioned before, and it's just going to kind of drill it into your head, permaculture is a set of principles that can be applied universally. And I've seen some fantastic examples of permaculture projects in rather extreme cold climates. So permaculture can be applied in any climate, not just warm climates. The ninth myth, which relates a little bit to the too complicated myth, is that permaculture is only for experts. And this isn't the case at all. Permaculture is extremely beginner friendly. There's a ton of fantastic resources out there online. They're for free. There's some great books. I know many permaculture teachers who teach a 2-day permaculture introduction course, so you don't have to go in and do the whole design certificate over maybe 2 weeks. Instead, you do it over a weekend. You find out all of the basics of permaculture, and you come away from that thinking, wow, I can really do it. And so permaculture is not only for experts at all, it's for everyone to use. The 10th permaculture myth is that you have to observe a plot of land, say you just got an allotment, for a year before you do anything. Now, there's truth in this if you're looking at a large landscape. You need to work out where all of the frost pockets are, you need to work out where the water flow is, where all of the springs exist. However, this is quite impractical for anyone that's growing food on a domestic scale. I, for example, couldn't possibly imagine getting a garden and then not doing anything with it for a year. It's okay to get stuck in. You need to get stuck in. Permaculture is very practical. And what the nice thing is that if you do run into potential challenges later down the line, there's a lot of flexibility and adaptability built into the principles. And so you can tweak and adjust a design, you can tweak and adjust your garden over time, but never feel that you just can't do anything at all. Go for it, and then adjust and tweak when necessary. The 11th myth is that permaculture isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not kind of a cookie-cutter technique where you copy and paste just because someone else is doing something and it's permaculture doesn't mean that it's going to work in your environment. Every single garden is different, every single space is different, it has its own challenges, its own opportunities, and so it's so important to take inspiration from books and other projects, but then to adapt them so they actually suit your needs the most, because one permaculture project might actually, maybe its main goal is to produce as much food as possible, whereas someone else might have a permaculture project where the main goal is to create as much space for wildlife as possible. You might want to incorporate both elements. And so it's about kind of cherry picking the things that make sense, adapting them, and then over time tweaking them if necessary. Never feel pressured to do something just because loads of other people are doing it. It doesn't always mean that it's going to be right. This myth in particular is more a case where experience comes in. If you're an absolute beginner, this is where you might start to think, oh no, I'm not sure what I should do. But the nice thing about the permaculture community is that there's always someone who'll be willing to help guide you. The best way to learn is to actually just get stuck in, not to do loads of theory and think about it, just do something and then change it if you need. The 12th myth is that permaculture is just for plants. This couldn't be further from the truth. Permaculture takes inspiration from natural patterns. There is not one ecosystem out there where animals don't play a huge role in the way that that ecosystem functions. And so very much depending on scale. For us here, we've got chickens. We're doing a deep compost mulch system where you can create a load of compost for the gardens. But then on larger scales, you can look at, say, ruminant animals. A well-designed permaculture system needs to take animals into account, be it domesticated animals and livestock, bees are another one, or even wild animals. Is there a way of, say, attracting birds of prey to deal with rodent issues in your garden? And so, yeah, animals are just as important as plants for many permaculture projects. They very much work symbiotically, hand in hand. This is me trying to bust as many permaculture myths as possible, and I got a video right here which is the 12 permaculture principles using the context of a garden to teach all of those principles and how they relate to your self-sufficiency journey. So check it out, hopefully you'll learn a lot.